The water here doesn't move like anywhere else. It folds into itself, glass over glass, light breaking into slow fragments that scatter across the white stone. From the terrace, the air tastes of salt and ripe figs. The hum of cicadas, a constant, hidden rhythm under everything. Mykonos, in late season. Less noise, but still wrapped in the weight of its own beauty. Nye was leaning over the edge of the infinity pool when I first saw him. Not the casual look you give a stranger on vacation. This was something else, sharper. The way you notice a shadow before you notice the object that casts it. He was across the courtyard, leaning one shoulder against a column, the sun catching in his hair just enough to turn it a shade lighter. An NTHE pool's surface broke when I straightened, a single ripple bending the reflection of the sky. He didn't move, didn't glance away when I caught him watching. There was no smile, no acknowledgement, just the kind of gaze that feels like it's reading what you haven't decided to say. Behind him, someone called out. A man's laugh, the sound of cutlery against porcelain. He turned slightly, enough to show the line of his jaw, the hint of sun just above his collar. Then he walked away, the slow pace of someone who knows they can be followed without turning around. And I stayed by the pool, the sound of water shifting around my legs, the air tightening in the space he'd left. That stillness stayed with me through the rest of the afternoon. The market stalls, the bright linen of cafe tables, the low calls of boats in the harbor. Each place felt like a stage without its lead. Later, on the way back to the villa, I saw him again. Not on the terrace this time, but in the main hall, framed by the archway that led to the dining room. He stood near the marble console, where the evening light pooled in warm gold, his hand resting on a glass of something amber. He was speaking to a woman in a white dress, her arm lightly touching his. NNSHE turned toward me before he did. My stepmother NNHER expression didn't change. She always wore composure like it was made for her, but there was the smallest flicker in her eyes before she smiled. He looked then, directly at me, and for a moment there was no recognition in his face. No shift that said we'd already crossed paths by the pool. NNTHE chandelier above them swayed slightly, though the air was still. I walked past, the echo of my heels against the marble floor cutting the space between us into precise, measured beats. NNBY. The time I reached the stairwell, I could feel it, the trace of his gaze on my back, following as cleanly as a line of shadow under the last light of the day. And I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because in that moment, I already knew. Whatever had just begun would not be something I could step out of easily. The villa in the morning is quiet in a way that feels intentional, as if someone has turned the volume down on the entire island. Light slides across the marble floors in long, pale rectangles, carrying the smell of coffee from somewhere down the hall. I move barefoot, the silk of my robe whispering with each step, the air still cool enough to keep me aware of my skin. NNTHE's sitting room is empty, except for the remnants of last night. A scarf thrown over the arm of a chair, an empty glass with the last drop of wine drying at the bottom. On the low table, a stack of magazines and a leather-bound book sit under a shallow bowl of lemons. I pick up the book without thinking, the texture warm from the sun. It isn't a book. It's an album, NNTHE. First pages are landscapes. Blue water, white stone, gardens lit in late light. Then halfway through, the images change. People, faces. My stepmother in a narrow silk dress, her shoulders bare, her hand resting lightly on a man's arm. His face is turned toward her in the shot, profile cut sharp against the evening sky. Even in the stillness of the photograph, the proximity is unmistakable. Nay, I press my thumb to the edge of the page, but I don't turn it yet. My breath has already adjusted to something slower, the kind that makes sound feel too loud. The next photo is closer, the frame filled with the two of them. Her mouth caught mid-laugh, his hand at the small of her back, a gesture that speaks of habit, not chance. It's him. An NTHE, same man from the pool, from the marble archway, from the silent exchange under the chandelier. The recognition is instant, like a drop of ink into clear water, spreading, unavoidable. And then I close the album, the cover landing with a muted thud against the table. The sound seems to move through the room, small but final. Through the tall windows, the sea is a sheet of white light, almost too bright to look at. I catch my reflection in the glass, still, but with something unreadable in the eyes. Footsteps approach from the hallway. Light, measured. My stepmother appears in the doorway, dressed in soft linen, a scarf loosely draped over her shoulders. She carries her coffee with the ease of someone who has been here long enough to know where the shadows fall during the day. "You're up early," she says, her tone easy, though her gaze moves. Table, album, my hand resting too close to it. And I smile, small, controlled. "Couldn't sleep." SHE sets her coffee on the table beside the album, but doesn't open it. The faint scent of her perfume drifts between us, mingling with the sharper citrus from the bowl of lemons. She sits, crossing her legs with the precision of someone who understands the space she occupies. And I stand, letting the robe fall a little closer around me and walk toward the terrace doors. The glass is cool under my fingertips as I slide it open. Outside, the air is already warming, the island stretching into the day. I don't look back as I step onto the terrace, but I feel it again. The quiet gravity in the space between her and that album. And somewhere behind that, the weight of him, NNTHEC below, throws shards of light into the sky, the wind lifting the edge of my robe. I stand at the railing, the sound of the water louder now, letting it fill the space where the rest of my thoughts should be. Dinner at the villa is always arranged as though someone might photograph it for a magazine. Linen pressed to a perfect line, cutlery placed with mathematical precision, candles just tall enough to cast light without shadowing faces. The terrace table is set for 8, but my focus holds on 3 seats, hers at the head, his to her right, and mine across from them both. The sun is sinking toward the water, flooding the space with that deep Mykonos gold that makes every glass look as though it holds something rare. From my place, I see the way her hand hovers just above his wrist when she speaks, a pause that lasts longer than necessary before she moves to reach her glass. He listens without interrupting, his eyes fixed on her mouth. But when he leans back, his gaze shifts past her shoulder and catches mine. It's not a challenge, not even an acknowledgement. It's the stillness of someone who knows the line between looking and touching is thinner than it should be. My stepmother turns her head slightly toward him, unaware of the silent exchange. I pick up my glass, the stem cool between my fingers, and let the rim rest at my lips longer than it takes to drink. The conversation around the table is polite, almost airless, with bursts of laughter that rise and fall like rehearsed cues. Plates arrive. Grilled fish laid over herbs, olives glistening in oil, bread warm enough to release steam when broken. I watch the way his fingers move as he tears the bread, the strength in the small motions, the way the knuckles shift under his skin. A candle between us flickers, breaking for a moment in the breeze, and in that brief shadow, his gaze drops to the hollow of my throat. My breath catches. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough that I set down my glass before I spill it. Across the table, her hand slides over his forearm, in a gesture of possession so effortless it could be mistaken for affection. He doesn't pull away, but he doesn't turn toward her either. Instead, his thumb moves slowly along the edge of his plate, a movement almost in time with my own fingertip tracing the condensation on my glass. The rest of the evening stretches on in the measured pace of courses and refills. I speak when spoken to, answer in words I can't recall afterward. My attention is not on language, but on the invisible line running beneath the table, on the space between his knee and the air it might touch. When dessert is served, figs soaked in syrup, cream folded over their edges, her attention shifts to the guest on her other side, her laughter tilting away from him. In that opening, he lets his eyes hold mine for longer than they should, the slow weight of it more intimate than any touch. The plates are cleared, the wine poured again, and the conversation resumes its surface flow. I lean back in my chair, the night air cooler now, carrying the scent of the sea up from the rocks below. From here, with the candlelight softening the space between us, I can almost imagine we are alone. Almost. The storm began without warning, the kind that rolls in from the horizon like a single bruise, darkening everything in slow increments. By late afternoon, the sky had lost its edges, the light on the water turning from silver to a flat, opaque gray. Most of the guests stayed inside, but I took a glass of wine and stepped onto the covered terrace, the air heavy with salt, and the electric scent that comes just before rain. He was already there, standing near the far railing, one hand braced on the wood, the other in his pocket. The wind caught the edge of his shirt, pulling it tight against his back before letting it fall again. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The distance between us felt measured, deliberate, as though we both understood it couldn't be crossed without consequence. He turned his head slightly, enough for his profile to come into focus, the sharpness of his jaw shadowed by the shifting light. I stayed where I was, the stem of my glass balanced loosely between my fingers. the wine catching what was left of the daylight. The air thickened as the first drops began to fall beyond the terrace cover, hitting the pool in small, perfect circles that vanished as quickly as they formed. I stepped closer to the railing, not toward him but toward the sea, though the space between us narrowed. The sound of the storm deepened, the wind pressing harder, the curtains at the terrace entrance lifting and twisting before settling again. I could feel the pull in my chest, not toward the view, but toward the weight of his presence at my side. He glanced down at my hand where it rested on the railing, his gaze lingering on the curve of my fingers, the slow way I traced the grain of the wood. Without thinking, I mirrored the angle of his stance, our shoulders almost parallel now. The air between us shifted, no touch, but the certainty of it hung there, unspoken. The wind pushed a strand of hair across my cheek, and I didn't move it. His hand left the railing, hovering for a fraction of a second as if he might brush it back, but instead he let it fall to his side. That pause, that refusal, was more charged than any contact. The rain came harder, the sea below churning into a darker blue, the horizon lost entirely. I could hear the unevenness of my own breathing against the steady rhythm of the storm. Somewhere behind us, the sliding door opened and closed. Footsteps, voices calling across the villa, but they faded before they reached us. He shifted his weight, turning just enough that his shoulder brushed mine in passing, a touch so slight it could be mistaken for accident. But the pause afterward made it clear it wasn't. The glass in my hand was empty by then, though I hadn't realized I'd been drinking. The air smelled of wet stone and something warmer, the trace of his cologne cut through by the salt. When he finally stepped away, it was without looking back, leaving the space between us colder, the storm outside still building. I stayed on the terrace until the light was gone, the sea a moving shadow under the rain, the heat of that brief contact lingering against my skin longer than the wind could strip it away. The night had the kind of heat that doesn't fade after sunset, the air close and heavy, pressing against the skin. From the terrace, the pool lay still under the low lights, its surface reflecting the villa's white walls and the faint movement of palm fronds above. I had slipped out of the dinner early, the sound of conversation lingering behind like a faint echo, carrying none of the weight I felt in my chest. Barefoot, I moved along the cool stone path toward the far end of the garden, where the shadows thickened. NNHE was there. Not waiting, not by design, but present in the way someone becomes part of the scene without asking. The soft glow from the pool caught the outline of his shoulders, the open collar of his shirt, the slow turn of his head when he sensed me. There was no startle, no greeting, just the awareness settling between us, the kind that makes the space feel smaller than it is. I stopped a few paces away, the air charged in the narrow gap, the sound of water, the only constant. NNHE stepped closer, not enough to bridge the distance, but enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from him. My hand, still at my side, brushed against the fabric of his sleeve when the breeze shifted. I didn't move away. His eyes held mine, steady, as if tracing an unspoken map neither of us had drawn. The stillness was dangerous. It was the kind that could dissolve with a single gesture. His hand lifted slightly, almost a question, before he reached past me to the edge of the low wall, fingers grazing the stone just beside my hip. The proximity was its own kind of touch, invisible but precise. NNFOR a moment, the rest of the villa ceased to exist. The music, the lights, the people inside. The only movement was the faint shift of his weight toward me, the kind that changes the air's temperature. My breath caught without sound, and I let my gaze drop to the space between us, where the air felt thick enough to hold. When I looked back up, his expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes told me he knew exactly how close we were to crossing something neither of us could step back from. Then, as if pulled by the same thread, we moved. Only a fraction, but it was enough. The line broke. His hand, still on the wall, brushed against mine, the contact brief yet searing in the way it left, no doubt. My fingers didn't close around his, but they didn't retreat either. The sound of the pool filter hummed low, water lapping softly at the edges, the night holding its breath with us. It ended as quietly as it began. He stepped back, letting the air cool between us again, his gaze dropping once before he turned toward the villa lights. I stayed by the wall, my hand still warm where it had met his, the scent of the garden, jasmine, salt, and something darker, pulling around me. In the stillness, I knew the crossing had happened, no matter how small. And once you cross, you don't return the same. The villa was louder than it had been all week, voices spilling across the terrace in warm currents, the sound of cutlery on porcelain breaking the still air. Inside, light poured from the chandeliers, throwing reflections across the glass doors, doubling and tripling the movement of people passing by. I stood near the edge of the room, my back to the wall, the stem of a half-empty glass cool in my hand. From here, I could see them without being seen. My stepmother in a dress the color of deep wine, her laughter spilling too easily, his figure beside hers, anchored in stillness. It happened in fragments, like a sequence too quick to catch in full. She leaned in to whisper something in his ear. He smiled, not at her but past her, to the empty space that happened to align with my gaze. And then she turned, following that line, finding me. The silence was instant. Not in the room, the music and voices continued, but in the narrow corridor between our eyes. My glass tilted slightly in my grip, the weight of it reminding me to hold still. NNSHE stepped away from him, crossing the space with the slow, deliberate precision of someone who knows every eye is following. Her hand, warm and certain, found my arm, guiding me toward the terrace. Outside, the air was cooler, the sound from inside muted behind the glass. She didn't release me right away. Her fingers tightened briefly, not enough to hurt, but enough to speak without words. "I hope you're enjoying yourself," she said, and though the words were light, her gaze stayed sharp, unblinking. I answered with a smile, the kind that holds steady no matter the temperature beneath it. She let go, turning back toward the room, leaving me alone under the open sky. And I stayed where I was, the pool below reflecting the gold spill of the interior lights, the sea beyond a black, unbroken stretch. The glass door opened again, and he stepped out. No pretense this time, no casual glance, no accidental proximity. Just the quiet certainty of someone who knew the cost and had already decided to pay it. For a moment, we didn't move. The air between us was clear, stripped of the subtle games that had carried us this far. My stepmother's reflection lingered faintly in the glass behind him, her figure framed in light, watching without watching. He closed the distance with 3 slow steps, each one measured, as if marking the end of something as much as the beginning. And when he stopped in front of me, the sound from inside seemed to fade entirely. I could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint crease between his brows, the slight lift of his breath as he searched mine. No words passed between us, but the truth was already there, laid bare in the space we had kept, in the moments we had let pass, in the ones we had stolen. NNHE lifted his hand, not to touch, but to let it hover just above mine, the shadow of it brushing against my skin. The faintest tremor ran through me, a current that began at that point of almost contact and spread outward. I didn't pull away. Neither did he. We stayed suspended there, on the narrow edge where choice becomes fact. And then, from inside, the sound of glass shattering, a sharp, clean break that cut through the night. He didn't turn toward it. Neither did I. We stayed facing each other, the sound still hanging between us like the last note of a song. And it was enough. The moment had tipped. The crossing complete. Whether we moved forward or not, no longer mattered. The truth had been seen. And once seen, it couldn't be put back.